Okay, so Chapter 7 deals with economic systems, and we needed Chapter 6 first on food getting strategies because it's very closely tied to economic systems. So here are some of the things that we'll discuss in Chapter 7. So every society has rules on allocating resources. So what are those resources? A common one is land or other natural resources. And then a second resource would be technology. So as far as natural resources like land, for foragers, land is not particularly important from an individual perspective. So there's no individual ownership of land in a foraging society. Remember, these are small groups of people. They're nomadic, generally speaking, and so, it's the resources that are on the land that are important to them, not the land itself necessarily. With horticulturalists, they're what we might call semi-sedentary or semi-nomadic, in that they will stay in one place maybe for a year or two gardening, but then a lot of times the soil becomes depleted, and you've probably heard of slash and burn horticulture. So they move around a little bit, so the land has maybe a little bit more value, but not kind of an individual value. Again, with horticulturalists, maybe a family would be assigned a certain plot within a garden, but again, that's kind of a temporary situation. Pastoralists, more territories than particular land, so maybe this particular group does herding in this particular territory, and this group stays over here, and that sort of thing. With intensive agriculturalists, they are very much for private ownership of land, because again, they're cultivating the same piece of land over and over again. And with more, as societies tended to grow, and we started to develop countries, European countries, and those sorts of things, and colonialism, land rights became a huge issue. So here would be an example of slash and burn horticulture. So this is happening in the Amazon, and so clear out a certain area, grow your crops, and then move on to the next one when the soil becomes depleted. So their ideas of land ownership are temporary, and it's not so much that they own the land, it's just that they're using the land. So technology would be another, so the material goods. Every society makes use of technology, including tools, constructions, and required skills. And so those resources are also allocated. So in foraging, you might make your own tool, but you would gladly share it with others. In horticulture, again, it's simple tools. With intensive agriculture, using more complex tools or more individual ownership of property and technology. So also, every society has rules on allocating resources. They also have rules on converting those resources. So, transforming them into food or tools or other goods through the process called production, which we're familiar with that term. So types of economic production, there's domestic, which means that the production happens at a household level. So typical foragers. So in foragers, lots of domestic production where the family, all able-bodied adults are involved in getting food for the family, and the production is happening right there on a domestic level. Industrial production, we've heard of the Industrial Revolution, so the burning of fossil fuels to create faster production of materials happening in more complex societies. Tributary production, again with more complex societies, with assigning different. So when you come to intensive agriculture, you get to where not everybody has to be involved in making the food, and so there's different types of production that can happen on different levels. And then we're kind of in this post-industrial type of production where information is huge right now. So the conversion of resources, it's labor involved. There has to be certain incentives for labor. So at the foraging level, the incentive is to provide food for yourself and your family. In our culture, this is an incentive for labor. If you want money to buy food and things like that, then you should get out and work, right? So there's forced and required labor. So again, you don't see that often in foraging, horticultural, pastoral societies, but intensive agriculture, commercial agriculture, industrial, post-industrial societies, forced and required labor occurs. So here we're talking about slavery, or working off. So you think about kind of 17th, 18th century Europe, where you've got serfs and people working for a certain amount of years on a number of years on a certain piece of land and that sort of thing, and kind of a hierarchy of production goods and traveling of goods. So division of labor, all societies divide labor based on age and gender. Now our society is becoming less so on gender, so basically any job a man could do in our society, then a woman should be able to do it as well. But we still do have some gender division of labor. But in other societies, division of labor is more pronounced. So again, like with foraging, the women typically gather and the men typically hunt. The organization of labor can be real simple on a foraging scale to real complex. Like, maybe the job that you work for, you've had to have organizational structure meetings where you've got these charts of who's who and who goes where and how does the work flow through here. So it can be either really simple, like on a foraging level, hey, let's get a party of 3 guys, let's go out and hunt, on this particular day. Real simple organization of labor to, again, more complex. And then, of course, there's cultural variation on making decisions about work. So as far as gender, dividing labor based on gender and age, this is a good pie chart that shows female child versus female adult, male child versus male adult, females versus male on who does what, typically. So it was only through anthropology and cross-cultural research that we can come up with, how much time do men spend doing this particular task from a cross-cultural perspective, or women, that sort of thing. So all societies, this is a universal. All societies have some division of labor, different kinds of work to different kinds of people, and all societies have division of labor based on gender and age. So here's a woman roasting nuts, and then you could think about caloric contribution to the group. If gathering is really important and provides most of the calories, women tend to be more important in those society than in a society where men's activities provide most of the calories. So we can talk about distribution of goods and services under 3 types: reciprocity, redistribution, and market or commercial exchange. And under reciprocity, which is giving and taking without the use of money, there's generalized reciprocity and balanced reciprocity. And so generalized reciprocity is when you give something to someone without the expectation of a return gift. So usually this happens with close kin, and is very typical of foraging societies. Here, I give you this. I don't care to have it back. You can use it, etc. But we do that in our society too, and it's usually, again, with people we're close to. With strangers, we tend to see more balanced reciprocity, where I give you something and then you give me something of the same value right away. So in our culture, it would be, I'll give you this money, you give me the camera or the phone or watch or whatever it might be. So redistribution is the accumulation of goods or labor by a particular person in a particular place for the purpose of subsequent distribution. So this is usually a class society, social stratification, where someone towards the top gathers the resources and then redistributes them. In market or commercial exchange, prices depend on supply and demand, and that's what we're used to. So here we only have one type of money, paper and coin. In different societies with these economies, there might be different kinds of money, special purpose money that are only used in certain sort of transactions, or like us, we have just general money, general purpose money. And of course, there's degrees of commercialization, and we're starting to see this with globalization now, as certain non-commercial societies are starting to become more commercialized. Some may just be beginning, whereas ours is a full-blown commercialized society. The book will give you examples on why money and market exchanges develop, and possible leveling devices in commercial economies. So ways of kind of keeping the social stratification from getting out of hand. So again, with globalization, we're starting to see a worldwide trend toward commercialization, with migratory labor, so workers coming into a country to do a certain job that no one in that country wants to do, or they can do it for cheap or whatever. Non-agricultural commercial production, so the focus historically was on agricultural production, but now there's, with globalization, there's all sorts of production of different items that do not deal with agriculture. Supplementary cash crops, so cash crops would be important for horticultural groups that may, you might think of specialty type crops like coconuts or something like that. And the introduction of commercial industrial agriculture has, you may have heard of the Green Revolution, which was this idea that let's take commercialized agriculture and put it into non-commercial settings where the people are growing their own food, and show them, hey, this is how we use our tractors and that sort of thing. So we're starting to introduce commercial and industrial agriculture into places that were typically horticulturalists. So with migratory labor, some members of a community move to a place that offers a possibility of working for a wage. Non-commercial agricultural production is when a self-sufficient society becomes depend more and more on trading for its livelihood. This is generally done to obtain other industrially made objects. So it might be that your particular society is putting less focus on the agricultural aspect and more on trading. So supplementary cash crops, when people cultivating the soil produce a surplus above their subsistence requirements, which is then sold for cash. And again, commercial agriculture, kind of this introducing of, hey, this is how our production process works, and it may work for you as well. So there we go with Chapter 7. If you have any questions, feel free to give me an email. Thanks.